Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is John Bond, and I'm accountable for the sales and marketing at Medmont. For over 20 years, Medmont has been one of the leading providers in specialty care eye space, and we look forward to continuing this legacy. We at Medmont are extremely excited to share with you today our first webinar in a series of 3, introducing our new advanced topographer, Medmont Meridia. Today's session, titled as An Introduction to the New Medmont Meridia Advanced Topographer, will be presented by Randy Kojima. Randy Kojima is a clinical research and development director for precision technology based in Vancouver, Canada. He also serves as a research scientist and a clinical instructor at Pacific University College of Optometry in Forest Grove, Oregon. Additionally, he is a clinical advisor to Medmont Instruments in Melbourne, Australia. Randy has published numerous articles, submitted posters on various contact lenses related topics, as well as been a contributing author in a number of textbook chapters. He lectures globally and enjoys sharing insights, methods, and research with eye care colleagues from around the world. Randy is a fellow of the American Academy of Optometry, the British Contact Lens Association, and the Scleral Lens Education Society, and the International Academy of Orthokeratology. With no further ado, it's my honor to let Randy Kojima take the reins.
Hey, thanks, John, and welcome, everybody. Thanks for connecting up with us tonight. I know it's getting late there in Europe, so we appreciate your time. I have Medmont Meridia serial number 1. It's pretty cool that I've been able to convince them to send me one very early, so I've got a bit of experience with it. I've had it for, must be going on about 2 years now, and really excited to share with you some of my findings with the instruments, some of the things you could do that are new to topography and new to Medmont. Well, let's get started. First, there are 2 instruments that make up the Medmont Meridia. One is the Pro, and one is the Classic. And when you look at these 2 photos, you may notice there's a slight difference in the wings on the side. There's some illumination that you can, lights you can see on the right image or the right instrument. So that's the Pro, and the one on the left is the Classic. They both perform the same function topographically, and if you look at the cone construction, it's absolutely identical between the Classic and the Pro. And in fact, the internal makeup, the construction of the cone is identical to the original E300 for those of you who have one of those instruments. But where the instruments differ is in those 3 lights or illumination sources on lateral sides of the cone, and that's where they're different. Now, if you're thinking about changing from a E300, let's say, to a Meridia, can you be confident that the instrument is going to perform as accurately as the E300 did? And I was very interested in that too. And ultimately, what I did was take 30 patients and image with both the E300 as well as the Meridia, and analyze the apical radius for the flat and steep meridian. So that's the flat RO, or radius at 0 distance from center. Then the sagittal depth, of course, that's so important to our contact lenses, getting the height correct. The eccentricity used by many fitting softwares to construct their lenses, especially in orthok, and then the flat and steep K. So ultimately, the way it works out is these 2 instruments image the eyes absolutely identically. The flat apical radius is within a fraction of a quarter of a diopter. The same thing with the eccentricity and the sag. They're just so tight in the way the 2 instruments measure, and that probably makes sense because I'm told by Medmont the internal construction, the way the cone lights, the placido rings are built, and the mirrors and the depth, it's identical. So Medmont took its very accurate E300 and incorporated the placido technology into the Meridia. So that's kind of good news. For those of you who are familiar with the E300, you can have the same confidence in its accuracy. Now, those illumination sources are unique. Now, the Meridia Classic does not include the illumination. So it's very much like an original E300 unit. If you want to go to the next level, if you want all of those imaging options that are available in the instrument, then you want to go to the Pro. So Meridia Classic would be without the illumination. The Meridia Pro would be with the illumination that you can see here. So the Pro allows for the use of topography, of course, but then there's an infrared camera for mybography. There's white light illumination for slit lamp-like imaging, as well as fluorescein cobalt illumination for any kind of fluorescein photography or video that you want to do. So when you look at the two instruments, the Classic will do topography. You still have the contact lens software. You have the ability to image the tear film quality, the TFSQ, tear film surface quality. So the Classic and the Pro share these functions similar to the way the E300 did, where the Pro also adds a number of illumination features. So we talked about the white light, the mybography, and the fluorescein analysis. And we'll spend a little bit of time on some of these other imaging capabilities that the Pro can do, because now we really have a dedicated contact lens oriented tool that allows us both imaging and video. So pretty exciting stuff. And one of the things that I like is that everything is going into one patient file. So with one instrument, you have the patient able to be imaged in so many manners, and it's not just a convenience for you and your staff, but it's also a convenience from the perspective that you go into one software and you have access to all of this data. One of the things the new instrument has that the previous didn't is a hotkeys, and that allows you to do many of your functions right from the instrument. So rather than needing to employ a mouse, your hands are 100% on steadying the instrument, and when you take a capture that you like, it's just a quick click of the button. If you want to zoom in and ensure that the ring reflection off the cornea is optimal, it's a click of the button right on the base. And I'm a really firm believer that corneal topography needs to be done in a smooth and steady manner. You know, of course, we're taking photography, so we want our object to be steady, and we as the users, of course, have to be steady. So being able to have two hands on the base for me is kind of a big deal, because I'm able to steady my camera, if you imagine it that way, and then I've also got the ability to process, to forward, to enter when I need to perform a function. Topography is so critical in orthokeratology today. I think we see in the symposia the interest in myopia control. It's kind of hard to ignore that we really have a shifting industry where so many of us that may not have been involved in myopia control are now considering it today. And maybe some of you on the webinar are attending because you're thinking about getting a topographer for Ortho-K. So I hope you don't mind if we spend a little bit of time talking about Ortho-K, since it is such a hot topic. And how can this instrument be used to assist in orthokeratology practice? Well, just recently we did a study to understand what patients are we actually fitting in Ortho-K today, with so much interest in myopia control. Is it 100% of Ortho-K cases that are kids? So we followed 155 consecutive orders of Ortho-K lenses for one single lab, one single design. So this represents the prescribing habits of numerous practices, dozens of practices across the country. It was basically done in Canada, And so that's 155 consecutive orders for patients. And what we found was that 16% of the patients fit in Ortho-K are adults. Yeah, it was kind of surprising. I'm a big proponent of Ortho-K for adults. I think for anybody who's very active, involved in anything with wind, spray, like water sports, or any skiing or those kind of sports where you're getting snow in the eyes, anything that's causing you to tear up and blink, motorcycling as an example. So all of these sports that involve something going in, whether it's air at high speed or wind and spray, Ortho-K is a great option because, of course, the patient isn't wearing the contact lenses during their activity. But I still have to admit, I'm shocked that we're fitting 16% are adults. So that was a really interesting finding from this study. Now, of course, the vast majority of patients fit in orthokeratology today are for myopia control. Almost 84% of patients were 17 years of age or younger. The minimum age for this cohort was 7 years of age. It was interesting to me that that kind of peak where practitioners seem to get patients involved in Ortho-K is the year of 10 years of age. So that was interesting as well. But again, Ortho-K mostly on kids. So that raises the question, can we even image these young eyes? For this little guy, who happens to be my son, he's opening up his eyes as wide as he can. And we're blocking a lot of the cornea. As you can see, that lower lid is really in the way of the inferior cornea, and he's not able to open up his fissure enough to expose the superior cornea. So how likely is it that we're able to get good data on kids? Now, the fissure size is just one thing. As you know, doing any kind of imaging on children is a challenge. They're never 100% steady, especially young boys like this. And getting a photo of the steady patient can be tough. Their fixation is constantly changing. It's a challenge. Well, Ortho-K lenses may require the highest level of accuracy of any contact lens. I would be pretty comfortable making that argument with a team of experts that no other contact lens requires the level of accuracy that Ortho-K does. And then there's also the factor of how big it is. We fit corneal GPs between maybe 9.2 and 9.5, or modern lenses maybe 10.2 to 10.5 is a bigger lens. But in Ortho-K, the conventional diameter is 10.6 would be a small lens. 11.0 would be maybe a more conventional diameter. So we need a lot more information in Ortho-K that we don't in other corneal GPs at least. So that requires us to get a decent amount of coverage. Now with these young patients, and my son is a good example where, we've got lid and lashes in the way. We've got those eyelash shadows coming down and restricting the reflection of the rings off the cornea. These are problems for corneal topography, and certainly a specific challenge for children. Well, one of the features that's unique to Medmont, and one that I personally believe is incredibly valuable for our construction, especially of Ortho-K lenses, but really any rigid contact lens. It's called the composite eye. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with this function, essentially what you do is you take a topography with the patient looking right down the visual axis. Then you're going to ask the patient to look 4 rings nasal, and that's going to push the rings to the temporal side of the cornea. Then we'll ask the patient to look 4 rings temporal, and that's going to push the rings to the nasal side. 4 rings down, pushing the rings up. 4 rings up, pushing the rings down. So essentially you're moving the reflection all over the eye to create a larger view of the cornea. And this way we have the data of the entire peripheral cornea, generally to the limbus. And this is helpful, especially for our large diameter ortho-K lenses, which, as I said, a conventional diameter might be 11 millimeters. So we really want a lot more information that we might with a conventional GP lens. So as you can see, the Medmont single capture, this is a normal photo where we're just snapping an image. We get a fairly large area of information. That's the benefit of a small cone instrument, that you get a larger surface area of coverage. But the benefit of Medmont's composite eye is we can fill in all of that peripheral information. So boy, I might be beating a dead horse here, but I believe so strongly in this composite feature as a tool for understanding the peripheral cornea, understanding the depth of contact lens that we need, the landing of lens we need. It is a ultra important data collection tool. So that raises the question, we have this very capable tool for imaging the peripheral cornea. How easy is it to get to collect data on kids in ortho-K? So again, we looked at the incoming data for a cohort of patients. So it was consecutive patients fit in a particular ortho-K lens, and we just basically analyzed all the maps that were coming in. So this wasn't topographies that we had taken. This is topographies from many different practices and their method of capture. The next thing that we wanted to do was understand what diameter of capture are we getting generally? 8, 9, 10, 11, and 11.5 millimeters. And you might ask, why would you guys go in 1 millimeter increments and then a ½ millimeter increment for the final? And that's because most eyes don't make it to 12 millimeters of corneal diameter or iris diameter. So we thought we should go to the diameter that generally the majority of eyes are going to fall within. So 11.5 was the largest. Now, here is the data collected on the flat axis of the eye. Now, generally, we can assume that most eyes are going to be with the rule or the flat axis. The horizontal meridian will be the flat meridian. So we're probably going to get a lot of data on the horizontal axis. And no surprise, we did. There aren't lid and lashes in the way. As you can see, on this side are the captures taken with one single photo. So this is not the composite. This is just taking a snapshot of the eye. And as you can see, in 95% of cases, you can get to 10 millimeters of data across the flat axis of the eye, generally the horizontal. As you go to, 11 millimeter and 11.5 millimeter, that's when the data starts to drop off. So we're getting less information as we go out. Whereas when we look at the composite topography data, we were able to get 99% of patients were able to get 10 millimeters, and 73% of patients were able to get all the way to 11.5 millimeters of data. So what this says is the composite map is very valuable for filling in the data you need in the periphery where the lens touches down, the important landing of an ortho-K lens, as well as the edge lift. Now on the steep meridian, this was really concerning. I have to admit, when I saw these outcomes, I was really concerned with how we are taking topographies. Now you'll notice in the single captures, our steep meridian, assuming for most patients it's going to be the vertical meridian, lid and lashes becomes a real factor, where 58% of patients were able to get 8 millimeters of data, but 0% of patients we were able to get 11 millimeters of data on. So the vertical meridian, we need to do a better job of trying to open up that fissure. In the composite data, it was interesting that we also saw challenges. And to me, this tells me we are not spending the time doing quality topographies, having the patient look down, having the patient look up, pushing the rings up to the inferior and superior cornea. It also says for sure that kids are tougher to image on, and my own kids are a real challenge. Even if I ask them to pull their cheek down, their lids are so tight, and there's mass around their tissue, the orb, that makes it hard for them to really open up. So no question, imaging on children is tougher. But what the study tells me is that we need to do a better job of pulling the fissure open so that we can get accurate outcomes for ortho-K on kids. Now, does the steep meridian really matter when the pressure, when the pressure and weight of the lens is mostly across the horizontal meridian? Who cares about the steep axis of the eye, or assuming the vertical axis of the eye? Well, one of the things that we do in ortho-K lenses that is much more common today than we ever kind of considered in corneal GPs previously was the toricity. Having good centration in ortho-K is absolutely critical to centering the treatment of the lens. In conventional GPs, a superior positioned rigid lens is not necessarily a bad thing. A superior central fit would be acceptable. But in ortho-K, we need it to be centered, so its hydraulic force is centered to the eye. So we understand the toricity not by looking at the center, by looking at the sagittal differential in the periphery. So we measure the height of the flat meridian, we measure the sagittal depth of the steep meridian, and we determine the difference. In this case, this eye has 38 microns of toricity around the peripheral cornea. So what does that mean? The flat meridian has X amount of depth, but the steep meridian is even deeper by 38 microns for this eye. Now, so what? Well, basically, as your corneal astigmatism increases, your peripheral toricity also increases. I guess no surprise there. We would expect the two would go hand in hand. Now, when you look at this graph, you see your corneal astigmatism along the X, your sagittal differential, your peripheral toricity along the Y-axis. And there's a fair degree of differential from top to bottom. Now, why would that be in the same corneal astigmatism? Let's take this 1.5 diopters of corneal sill. We have patients just around 13 microns of sagittal differential, and then maybe as high as 40-something microns of sagittal differential. Why such a huge difference? And that's because some patients have a figure-8 or hourglass astigmatism that's very confined to the apex of the eye. That would be your patient down here at the bottom, where their peripheral toricity is low, even though their central toricity is moderate, 1.5 diopters. Whereas for the patients on the top of the list here, they probably have limbus to limbus astigmatism, where that hot meridian extends from one side of the eye to the other. So therefore, you have more peripheral corneal sill. Now, so what? What does it matter that they have toricity? Well, at around 30 microns of sagittal differential, that's typically where a toric rigid landing, a toric rigid lens, will create a better alignment with the peripheral cornea. Then you get better centration, better comfort, better outcome of the effect. And this is universal to all our GPs. This is not specific to ortho-K. So what that tells us is that there's going to be a percentage of patients above the threshold and below the threshold. And essentially it works out to 65% of patients we fit in ortho-K lenses, at least based on this cohort, could have been fit in spherical symmetric landing lenses. But 35% of patients should be fit in a toric lens. And that's pretty high, right? 1 in 3 patients that we should consider toric ortho-K lenses for. So kind of a cool finding. And therefore, if we're imaging these kids and we're trying to spread our capture over the entire surface, the steep meridian actually matters. The vertical meridian does matter because we need to measure and we need to construct for the toricity that they have on eye. Now, is toricity really that important? We got by fitting symmetric lenses on most eyes since the beginning of corneal GP time. Well, here's two studies that might be of interest to you, both performed at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, led by Pauline Cho. For anybody involved in Ortho-K, you will know that she is the queen or diva of Ortho-K lens studies. Now, what they found in the first study, the TAN study, was that when you build a lens with a 30 micron threshold, as when you fit a toric landing lens, so avoiding this kind of dumbbell shape fluorescein pattern and going for ideal or perfect alignment around the eye, the TAN studies found that the first fit success using a Medmont and a system called the B-Free was 95%. First fit success was 95%. The second study, just published in the last month, the GOA study, found a 97% first fit success. Now, this is pretty high in orthokeratology. As you can imagine, a lens worn in the closed eye environment with those lid forces on the lens, that can wreak havoc on the centration of the lens. And certainly being able to achieve a high first fit success makes us so much more efficient in practice in general. You know, imagine if you fit the first lens and it decenters in some way. You wash the patient out, so you've just wasted at least 2 visits, the pre-fit and dispensing and the post-wear fit. If you've seen them maybe a little bit farther down the track after a week, so they've had a dispensing visit, a 1-night and a 1-week visit, and you've now wasted 3 chair time visits. So being able to get it right the first time is really valuable in orthokeratology because it's such a different contact lens. You know, we evaluate it after they've worn the lens, kind of not so much during the wear like we do with any other contact lens. Let's go through a case. Here's a patient. We have composite topographies on both eyes. We have a myopia controlling case. This is a 9-year-old girl with 1.5 diopters of myopia in the one eye, 1 1/4 in the left eye. I want to ask you a question. Where will an orthokeratology lens center on these eyes? When you look at the topography, is there any indication of where that lens may, or how the topography might influence the centration of the lens? And I don't know about you, but I'm feeling like the blue up here, the flat, would influence the lens going down, going inferior. The steep portion you see down here, the yellow-orange, might influence an inferior displacement because the cornea is more curved. If I look at this topography on the left eye, I think the contours extend a little farther south than they do north. So in terms of the axial map, I'm thinking that this cornea shows some inferior displacement. But this is not the way to assess the potential displacement. What we want to do is switch in our Medmont to the elevation map. We want to find the lowest point of elevation. And here you can see with the topographies converted from power or radius to elevation, the lowest point is this blue you see up here. And this eye has a -41 micron drop in elevation. So in other words, the superior cornea is depressing or losing elevation as we head north. On the left eye, it's even higher, a 50 micron, -50 microns of drop in elevation. So what the elevation map is telling you is that there is a likelihood that our lens is going to want to fall into that depression, into that elevation drop. Well, next thing that we need to assess is the visible iris diameter. So let's go to the annotate icon, select iris, and then we'll click our cursor on the one side of the eye, drag the cursor to the other side of the eye, adjust that circle up or down to make sure we've got it aligned to the circle aligned to the iris. And then you can see over here, we have a visible iris diameter of 11.3. Now, a typical way to choose an ortho-K lens would be VID minus 0.8. So 8.8 millimeters less than visible iris diameter would be a starting lens diameter. So for this patient, 10.5 would be an appropriate lens starting point. Kind of on the smaller side. So important to know this ahead of time, isn't it? Because we want to customize our ortho-K lenses for these eyes so we get the right lens the first time. Now, does this patient require a toric lens? We look at the corneal astigmatism, and it's 1.4 diopters of corneal sill. Not very high. Certainly wouldn't suggest that we need a toric. Let's look at that sagittal differential, that peripheral corneal toricity. And on our main Medmont window, we place this value where we can easily and accessibly see it. And it's telling us 27 microns of toricity around the peripheral cornea. Remember, our threshold of 30 microns is where we want to think about a toric landing lens. So this patient is kind of close to that threshold, but not quite there. Let's look at the left eye. And again, let's look at that sagittal differential, 32 microns. So the left eye is above the 30 micron threshold. We definitely want a toric for this left eye. Now, let's go to Medmont's contact lens software. And this is a awesome tool because it allows you to take all of those thousands and thousands of data points and then place a theoretical lens on top of that eye so that you can model the fit and decide, am I comfortable with the pattern I'm seeing? So let's focus on this right eye, on the flat meridian. And what you see is your apical clearance here in the center, that tiny little fluid layer. Then you've got your reservoir of tear, this ring of fluid that creates the suction force. Then your alignment with the peripheral cornea on opposing sides here and here. And then, of course, your edge lift to create a healthy, rigid contact lens fit. So hey, things are looking really good, right? On the flat axis of the eye, we have good landing at 3 and 9 o'clock. We have the appropriate fluid layer for a low myopic shift. Now let's go to the steep meridian of the eye. Remember, this patient has 27 microns of sagittal differential in the 27 microns steeper in the vertical meridian, and therefore the lens is going to lift off the surface by a degree, by about 27 microns. And here's where you see the possibility of considering a toric, even on patients that are really close to that threshold, but below the threshold. You know, I would like to see this alignment zone in better apposition, you know, more parallel apposition with the underlying eye surface. Certainly this lens is dispensable. That's not an excessive amount of fluid, but I might consider fitting this patient with the toric. And the contact lens software in Medmont is able to model this for me and tell me before we order the lens. Well, let's switch over. Let's actually order for this eye that shouldn't really need a toric. Let's put them into a toric. So here's your flat meridian and nothing changes. Good alignment along the flat, the 3 and 9 o'clock meridian. But let's go to the steep axis. And now with a deeper reverse curve and an alignment zone that's appropriately created for that surface, you see this kind of parallel relationship of the alignment zone to the underlying eye surface, allowing for that tiny little 10 micron channel, this tiny little fluid layer underneath. Now, this is important because it's an RGP, right? We still want it to have tear exchange. We want it to move freely. We want it to be able to free up in the morning when the patient wakes up so we can pop it out. So I think I'm liking the fit of this lens more. I'm going to actually order a toric for this patient, even though their threshold is slightly under that 30 micron threshold. Let's go over to the left eye. Remember, slightly more sagittal differential for this eye. Here's a symmetric lens landing at 3 and 9 o'clock. Then we go to the steep axis of the eye. Notice the alignment zone heading higher and higher and higher. You're getting more and more fluid. There's more room for that lens to rock back and forth because we have that 32 microns deeper vertical meridian. Well, let's switch over to a toric. And again, we have the same flat meridian. Let's go to the steep, and we see this beautiful parallel relationship at 12 and 6 o'clock, really creating a superior alignment with the eye surface that I don't think the spherical lens would have. Now, would there be a noticeable difference for the patient? I would say generally patients will choose the toric landing lens over the symmetric the vast majority of the time. I think from our perspective in the centration of the effect, the first fit success, for sure, using torics more often in all of our corneal GPs, not just Ortho-K, really creates better outcomes. Now, I said to you that the Meridia Classic does all of the topography imaging that the Meridia Pro does. So they're both identical in that manner, but the Pro includes the imaging capabilities. And one of those is the ability to image in white light. Kind of a helpful thing when we're dealing with kids, and we are very concerned about overnight contact lens wear. Being able to do photography of the entire anterior segment and document any findings that are there prior to Ortho-K or findings after Ortho-K. And one thing you'll notice is the way the Meridia illuminates. You have two light sources at 3 and 9 o'clock. So you're illuminating both hemispheres really, really well, which is kind of an advantage over the slit lamp where we have one single light source and we may not get that really diffuse illumination at times. So that's an advantage of the Meridia imaging. And then another thing is the depth of field. Medmont has really spent the money on a high resolution camera, and we get both the depth of field but also the resolution that's really quite impressive. So that's one thing I think you'll be really, really impressed with the Medmont, is that the imaging quality. You can also, in all of the imaging illumination, all the illumination environments, we can take both single images and video. And here you can see on our very fidgety, brand new rigid lens wear on the initial dispensing visit, and there's a lot of moving around by the patient. But you'll also notice that with the fluorescein imaging, you are able to pick up both, of course, the fit of the lens, but also any of those anomalies on the conjunctival or epithelial surface. It's really a beautiful camera illumination and imaging system altogether. So this is the Meridia Pro cobalt light capture. Now, one of the things you'll notice in terms of the lens fit is the high riding position. Is this related to this patient's ultra tight lower lid that just drives the lens up? Is it a lens that I've constructed poorly for the eye? Is it a lack of toricity? Is it just a flat fit, the lens hitting the corneal apex and being pulled by the upper lid up? This is a tricky thing in orthokeratology. We can never be so confident about the outcome of Ortho-K based on the dispensing visit fluorescein pattern. You know, there's so many factors that are at work in the open eye environment that may not be at work in the closed eye environment. Similarly, there's factors in the closed eye that don't exist in the open eye that we may not account for. So I'm never too worried about the fluorescein pattern analysis. As long as the patient's comfortable, which this patient was, and as long as the lens is reasonably well centered, I might try to pull the lids back to see if the lens wants to have a centered position. But again, I won't be too picky about it. So again, I'll just remind you that one of the benefits of the system is you can do both single and video capture in all of the imaging environments, which is kind of nice at times. Sometimes we want to document something with really high resolution. Sometimes we just want to follow the fit of the contact lens and see how much it moves, as an example. Now here's the patient after one night of wear, and you will notice that the blue treatment zone decenters kind of high following the manner that the fluorescein pattern suggested, a high riding lens. This patient was really happy with the visual outcome, although we had a smiley face. And maybe that's because it was a kid, and adults might be a little more sensitive to this inferior steepening that's inside the pupil. Recent research has suggested that the higher the coma created by these kind of steepenings, the better the myopia controlling effect. The more decentration, actually, the better the myopia control. So decentration in ortho-K may not be a bad thing. Again, as long as the patient is comfortable, the conjunctiva and peripheral cornea are clear and happy and healthy, then maybe we don't worry about it as much. Of course, we're going to try to center this lens as best we can. Here's the tangential map. You'll notice with Medmont, you get these utterly distinct, clearly defined kind of analyses of the topographical effects of ortho-K, and something I think Medmont is very famous for in the way they display the topographies in general, clearly telling us this lens is temporal and this lens is superior in the closed eye environment. Notice the red ring close to the nasal side, close to the inferior side, far away superior, far away temporally. Another thing that we can do, of course, is instead of imaging the contact lens, we could image the eye surface. And that was kind of a surprise. The Meridia is a topographer with imaging capabilities. You wouldn't expect it to perform like a slit lamp, but it's actually, it works really well in pre and post contact lens analysis because it is sensitive enough to pick up, the mildest amount of stippling on the corneal surface. So a really beautiful tool to have both pre-ortho-K, but also post-ortho-K. Now here's the patient after 10 nights of wear. You can see the effect on the axial map has gone up significantly, up to 1¼ diopters, but our blue treatment zone is still decentered high. So this was a little bit of a concern. The axial map useful for understanding visual cues. This patient was so happy with their vision. They were just shocked at how well they could see even after just one night. So we weren't too concerned about modifying the outcome. Here's the tangential map. You see that inferior smile, that paracentral steepening. Now this is where we might want to ask ourselves, do we modify? This is a smiley face outcome. This is not a centered bullseye topography. I should not be happy with this effect. But I might take you back to the elevation map. Remember that the superior cornea for nasal and temporal sides showed a pretty severe depression of about 40 to 50 microns heading north on the superior cornea. So that would suggest that the lens has more room to fall into that depression on the eye surface. So a high riding lens may be expected. Well, I did want to better center this lens for the patient. I wanted to at least try. So I did go steeper. And we ultimately weren't able to achieve a perfect bullseye outcome for this patient. So one of the things that's kind of helpful with topography is what it can tell you before you start. And the elevation map told us that this patient might be problematic because of that depression in the superior cornea that might cause the lens to ride on the high side. So we haven't worried about it too much because the patient is super happy with their outcome, and we're not seeing any issues in the corneal or conjunctival surface. Certainly comfort was really good for this patient, so there was no reason to make a change. Now, we've given this patient good vision. We've given this patient a healthy corneal outcome. Is this good myopia control? And how do we determine what's the difference between, let's say, a good topographical outcome and also a good myopia control? Well, you might focus in on the area of the 5mm pupil down here and understand the powers that are distributed across the pupil. So for this patient, the most minus, the most flattening that we're pushing is 1.65 diopters. The most plus in the pupil is about plus 0.15. So going from the most minus to the most plus, this lens has created a 1.8 diopter add. What does that mean? Well, in myopia control today, you're aware that if we fit kids with glasses, myopia controlling glasses, progressive addition lenses, or the new myopia controlling optics, that we're trying to push the plus. If we fit a patient with a soft multifocal, we're trying to push the plus. So here we've got a 1.8 diopter add. This would be pretty decent on a low minus patient like this. So I'm feeling confident about the myopia control that we're creating for this patient. So it's not just about the bullseye effect, it's also about whether you are pushing enough plus power. And another way to look at that is the spherical aberration. How much have you shifted spherical aberration for these kids in myopia control? And what we want to see is the spherical aberration values going up as high as they possibly can be. The higher the spherical aberration, the better the myopia control, is what the research is telling us. Now, with this new instrument, the Meridia Pro, we've got some pretty awesome capabilities for contact lenses, and in this case for ortho-K. It's, of course, a tool for the baseline map. It's a tool for the analysis post-treatment, but we also now have white light imaging, fluorescein imaging of both the lens on eye as well as the corneal surface. But there are more things that the Meridia can do, which is pretty exciting because it means that this tool is not just for contact lens, it's also now a very expanded imaging device and dry eye tool. For instance, all of the Medmont topographers have always been able to do tear film surface quality analysis. And the key feature is that it can determine the tear film breakup time non-invasively, which is encouraged by the DEWS 2 report, the kind of Bible of dry eye analysis and research. With the infrared imaging, we can image the Meibomian glands, which is, of course, very helpful in our dry eye practice and our contact lens practice for understanding the changes or effects that we may see over time or because of contact lenses. You'll notice the really very beautiful illumination and resolution that we're able to get off those Meibomian glands. With that same infrared light, we can also image the tear meniscus height without blasting the patient with too much white light and maybe possibly affecting the lacrimal lake. So imaging the tear meniscus height is something we can do with the new instrument. We can image the lid margin in high resolution, in high zoom if we need to. Obviously very beneficial in our dry eye practice. And what Medmont has created is grading scales and taking all of those grading scales and then putting them into a report. So in other words, you can grade each area of dry eye that you're following or that you're monitoring and assessing and put it into a report that you can provide to your patient so that they understand the reasons for the treatment that you're recommending or the plan for addressing these dry eye symptoms that they may be feeling. So kind of a powerful tool that you can use to work with your patients. So I hope this has given some perspective. I hope, and I know not everybody is an orthokeratologist, and that might not be the core of your practice, but I hope going through some of those, going through the case, gave you some insight in how we can both analyze the eye, but also how we can image the eye with this new Medmont Meridia tool. I've always been kind of resistant to say I love a product, and then certainly I work as a clinical advisor to Medmont, so I'm a little bit biased, but well, maybe I'm a lot biased, but certainly this tool in my hands has been an incredible device for contact lens practice. And my ability to put a patient in front of one instrument and basically do so many things. Of course, we're still so reliant on our slit lamp for an eye health check, but I can do the baseline topography, the pre-ortho imaging all in one instrument. Post-treatment, I really don't need the slit lamp. I can do the topography and the post-ortho imaging in front of my Meridia. And the same thing with the fluorescein assessment in any contact lens. It is really a superior way to illuminate the eye. The Meridia is really a beautiful tool in the way it both illuminates, but also its field of view and its resolution. So again, I know I'm biased, but I really can't say enough about how much I love this instrument. Hey, so I've done a little bit on the imaging capabilities of this new instrument, but somebody who is a world-renowned expert, Dr. James Wolfson, is going to take us through his experience using it for dry eye application. So for those of you who are really interested or that have that area of your practice is relatively big, and I would assume that's a large area for most practices, Dr. Wolfson is going to do, I'm sure, an incredible job. He sits on so many panels, global panels, certainly the DEWS 2 report is one of his babies. He's on myopia panels, I mean, you name it. He really is the ultimate researcher and educator and really trying to advance our knowledge in the field. So don't miss that webinar, which is coming up on Thursday, the 10th. And then on the 29th, Medmont has gotten together a panel of experts in the Meridia. And so these are all expert practitioners who have used the Meridia over the course of the past many months. And I'm going to try to ask them questions and ask them for their experience so that they can provide us some insights in both general practice, but also specific areas like the specialty of dry eye and like the specialty of contact lens. So, so if you can, join us for both of those. So I hope this session has been valuable to you, and if you would like more information, certainly go to the Medmont website. John has created some beautiful tools for education and for insight on what this new instrument will do, and certainly your distributor can be a valuable resource there in Europe. So again, guys, thank you everybody for attending this session. I hope it's been valuable, and look forward to maybe seeing you at the next session on Thursday. Thank you.
Hey, Randy, this is John.
Yeah.
We have one question if you're willing to take some.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's from David, and he would, the question is, would you reduce the treatment zone for myopia control compared to ortho K to get more plus peripherally? Yeah,
great question. Absolutely. The things that are tied together are when you use a smaller optic zone, you get a smaller treatment zone. If you have a smaller treatment zone, you increase spherical aberration. If you increase spherical aberration, then you decrease eye growth. So definitely those things go hand in hand, and I would absolutely encourage creating the smallest treatment zone that we possibly can. The question we don't know is there a point of diminishing returns? In other words, do we need to go down to a 4 millimeter optic zone in an ortho-K lens? Is that more beneficial than using a 5.5 millimeter optic zone? And there's going to be some research coming out of Spain, and it's looking at comparing a 6 millimeter optic zone, a 5.5, and a 5 millimeter optic zone to understand, is there a sweet spot for the optic zone of the lens, and then is there a point of diminishing returns? Is a certain degree too small where we either lose that ability, or maybe we have no additional myopia controlling effect? So still lots to learn on this particular topic, but one thing that we can say definitively is that making the treatment zone smaller increases the spherical aberration, increases the plus power that's pushed into the eye, decreases the myopia control. Sorry, decreases the axial growth. My apologies, doesn't decrease the myopia control.
Great. Thank you, Randy. I appreciate that. Great presentation. So for the audience, this completes our first of a three-part series in our introduction to Medmont Meridia. Again, please be on the lookout for an email with further information. I want to offer a special thank you and gratitude to Randy Kojima. Additionally, to our wonderful audience, we at Medmont thank you for taking the precious time to learn more. If you have questions that may arise, please go to our website at medmont.com and request information. Again, thank you, good day, and good night.